Hello everyone. My name is Nargiza. I'm the last speaker, so that's why I'm a moderator of the session. So our first speaker, Sun Young, he's supposed to be joining from Korea, but we cannot see him, so we will start with Becky. So Becky, the floor is yours. Maybe you can open the. Okay.
Open. What should I open for?
The camera. You can just do it like this, or.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Rebecca Cardinale, but I go by Becky, and I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate in the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics at UC Berkeley. This is my first presentation at a conference, so I'm really looking forward to receiving your feedback. So the title of the presentation is Stigma Goods Self-Checkout Adoption and Changes in Purchasing Decisions. And this is joint work with Lester Lusher, Becca Taylor, and Sophia Villas-Boas. So, okay, to motivate this talk, stores across the country and the world are increasingly adopting self-service technologies. In 2020, self-checkout processed 29% of transactions at food retailers, and this is an increase from the previous year. So I'm sure you have seen machines like those in the picture on the left at different grocery stores, maybe some drugstores. And additionally, this self-service technology is continuing to be innovated on, as you can see from Amazon Go stores, where you don't even have to check out at all. So a lot of the existing literature on these self-service technologies in retail establishments focuses on how the automation will affect employment. However, in this paper, we're going to focus on the consumers and how these self-checkout machines affect consumer welfare. So for this talk, we're going to focus on two behavioral phenomena, stigma and impulse. So the idea we have is that self-checkout registers may help consumers avoid feelings of embarrassment or shame that they might feel when buying like items that carry a stigma. And so, for example, in this 2021 poll, the top 10 items that Americans are most embarrassed to buy included condoms, emergency contraceptives, fed bug spray, head lice treatment, etc. So we hypothesize that consumers may be under purchasing goods that they are embarrassed about. So the idea for this paper is to consider how decisions at grocery stores differ under more private versus public conditions. And this is pretty similar to methodology used by Leo Burstein in a lot of his work. So we're going to think about a standard register with the cashier as the public condition, because the cashier scans and therefore directly observes every item purchased by the customer. Whereas the self-checkout registers, we're going to think about as a more private condition. It is true that sometimes there's an attendant standing nearby or something, but in general, the customer is going to scan most of their items on their own. And then for the impulse piece, we can think how customers might be impulsively buying certain items. For example, when you're waiting in line at the grocery store and the person in front of you is being checked out, there's kind of like usually the shelf of big king-size candy bars kind of staring at you in the face. So that relates a lot to the nudge literature and like choice architecture. So we're also going to think about how time spent in line could be leading to these purchases, impulsive purchases of temptation goods. So that leads to the research questions. The first being, how does the adoption of self-checkout machines affect sales of stigma goods? And here there's going to be two pieces. First, in terms of quantity. So were consumers under purchasing before? So when self-checkout becomes available, do consumers purchase more condoms or pregnancy tests or something? And then the second piece is going to be shifting between register types. So when self-checkout is available, if a consumer is going to buy a pregnancy test, are they more likely to go do the transaction at self-checkout rather than regular register. And then additionally, how does self-checkout affect sales of other goods? For this talk, we're going to focus just on the items typically placed near registers, like the candy bars and the magazines. However, in the paper, we also look at items which require effort to scan, like heavy dog food or free weight produce, where you have to like put in the barcode and weigh it. Okay. So for the empirical strategy, we're going to use a quasi-experiment from a large grocery store chain in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. There was staggered adoption of self-checkout over time between December 2008 and February 2011 in our sample. And the empirical strategy we'll be using is event studies to compare the outcomes in the treated stores which adopted self-checkout mid-sample to those which never adopted self-checkout. And there has been a lot of literature recently on how OLS with two-way fixed effects can be potentially biased in event study models with variation in treatment timing. So to correct for this potential bias throughout, we're going to be using the event study estimator developed by Callaway and Santana. Okay, so here we can see the staggered adoption of self-checkout machines over time. Each colored line represents one store. And on the y-axis, we have the fraction of transactions which were done using self-checkout. So here, when the line is at 0, the store doesn't have any self-checkout available. And you can see a lot of stores actually adopted self-checkout toward the end of our sample period, which makes it even more important that we're using the Callaway Santana estimators to potentially correct for the bias there. I also want to mention that the stores which adopted tended to be larger. So at baseline, yeah, the larger stores are adopting, and this makes sense because there's a certain amount of space that you need to be able to like maybe uninstall some regular registers and then install the self-checkout machines. However, in our event studies, we'll verify that the parallel trends assumption holds, so it should be okay. Okay, so just to give an idea of what items we'll be considering, within stigma, items for this talk will focus on pharmacy products specifically. A lot of these were listed in the poll previously, like the condoms, the hemorrhoid treatments, etc. And then we'll also look at proximity to registers, such as the single serving candies and magazines. And we do have a laundry placebo. And for this talk, we won't get into the effortful items. Okay, so as I said before, the data is high frequency supermarket scanner data, but actually we have two different data sets. So the first is we'll call random 10%, and here there were 9 stores which adopted self-checkout mid-sample. This data is made up of a random 10% of all the transactions on any day of the week at any time in our between December 2008 and February 2011. However, importantly, this data set does not contain information on whether self-checkout or regular registers were used. So we'll have to use the random 10% to look at like total sales. But then in the evenings data set, we do have information on whether the transaction was completed as self-checkout or regular registers. And actually, all the stores in random 10% are also in the evenings data set, but there are additional stores as well. And then here, we only have information on transactions between 5 and 6 p.m. on Saturday, but we have all the transactions in that time period. So for the first set of results, this is going to be using the random 10% data set. And here on the y-axis, we have the share condoms purchases as a share of total items. Here is the adoption of self-checkout. So we see that the parallel trends assumption appears to hold before adoption, and afterward, we have these positive coefficients. However, it's very noisy. So this is pretty weak evidence that the share of condoms sold increases. And the reason we're using the share variable is because when we also did an event study on total items and total expenditures, those increased after the adoption of self-checkout. So to account for that, we're going to be using the share of condom purchases, like condom purchases divided by the total expenditures. And then similarly for the feminine odor and yeast infection products, similarly to condoms, we see that the coefficients are all positive after the adoption of self-checkout, but it's still quite noisy, so it's only suggestive evidence. When we look at these other pharmacy products, we don't see much evidence at all of increases or decreases in the share sold. But then I want to draw your attention to the bottom right graph for the single serving candy. We actually find that the share of single serve candy or the single serve candies as a share of the total items decreased pretty significantly after the adoption of self-checkout. And we can compare that to these other unhealthy food items such as multi-serving candy. We don't see any increase or decrease. Same thing for sugary drinks and salty snacks. So we think that this is pretty strong evidence that the share of single serve candies decreased after this self-checkout adoption. And this is consistent with the behavioral mechanism in which maybe customers are spending less time waiting in line, or the single serving candies aren't displayed near self-checkout, so there's less impulse buying. Okay, now we'll move to the substitution results. So for this set of results, we're going to be using the evenings data set where we do know which type of register is used. So in this graph, we're plotting the percent. So for a given department, say fresh produce, the number of fresh produce that were checked out at self-checkout divided by the number checked out at any register. So like for total items, we see that 18% of total items were scanned through self-checkout. And we can see that the other departments don't seem to differ that much from total items. So yeah, at the department level, we don't really see evidence of substituting more to self-checkout than the average item sold. However, when we zoom in on the stigma items that we're considering, we see that pregnancy tests and condoms are nearly 25 percentage points more likely to be purchased at self-checkout than like the average item sold in the total items. And we also see for some of these other stigma items that they're more likely to be purchased as well, but less so than the pregnancy tests and the condoms. For this one item, the incontinence products, we actually see that they're less likely to be purchased at self-checkout. And one potential explanation is that these adult incontinence products are usually bought by older people, and maybe they have some type of aversion to go into the self-checkout lanes. So then we can also compare to these other items that we were looking at, and we see that none of them are like greater than 40%. So the condoms and pregnancy tests really seem to stand out. And we do see that single serving candy and magazines are more likely to be purchased at regular registers, which is also consistent with like the idea that the impulse buying is happening at the regular registers. So for the main takeaways, we used high frequency scanner data and staggered adoption of self-checkout registers to explore how this automation technology affects consumer welfare. And we found some weak evidence that self-checkout adoption increases the share of stigma goods sold just for condoms and the feminine odor and yeast products. But we also found that the stigma items are much more likely to be sold at self-checkout than the average item, and particularly pregnancy tests and condoms really stood out. And then finally, we found that the share of single serving candies sold decreases after the adoption of self-checkout, which is again consistent with this behavioral mechanism about time spent in line and impulse purchases. So thank you so much. I look forward to receiving your feedback.
Sure. So you talked about it and I missed the nuance of why you're looking at share rather than total purchases.
Right. So we did like kind of the same event studies where the y-axis was just total items sold. And then, yeah, after self-checkout, like they were all positive. So it seems like more items are being purchased at all of these stores. So then if we just did the number of condoms, that might increase, but it would just reflect like all the total items increasing as well. So then that's why we tried to look at the share instead. Does that make sense?
Kind of, but I guess it doesn't match my intuition of it.
Okay.
Because I'm thinking about like the supermarket as a substitute for another source of these goods, right? Like, am I shifting my purchase from the drugstore to the grocery store?
Right.
And I just need to increase goods that I buy from the, like, I don't know, that might be what I would want to see.
Okay.
I don't know, it's not clear to me. It's not clear to me that the share is the right thing. I guess the other question I have, which you may or may not know the answer to, given, you know, if some of these Stigma products were like behind a locked screen in the store? Because if they are, then you still have to interact with someone. And so you would still expect the shifting from like checking out with a person to self-checkout. But if going to the store means I have to interact with someone anyway, then maybe total demand doesn't change because I haven't gotten rid of all of the human interaction.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. And I think, so unfortunately, like this was in 2008, so we can't really know for sure, but we were, I think a common product that's usually locked up is condoms. So we were trying to see if these other products, which typically aren't locked up, had any changes, but yeah, it's hard to say. I think it is interesting that even though they might be locked up, there is like some weak evidence of an increase that like even just the prospect of not having to interact at checkout might have an effect. But yeah, it's definitely true that we can't really know for sure.
I'll talk more to you afterwards because I'm still stuck on this share thing and whether it's super cool stuff.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, I agree that people can just like be shifting from the drugstores to the ordinary stores, right? If they're moving some checkouts and or it can be like on top of it, they were just shifting to the stores. If they are in the visible place. Another question. I don't know if it's related or not, but those like substitution of the preferences, for example, if I go to the self-checkout, I can like maybe cancel some items that I don't want myself, but if I'm doing in person, have you tried to look at it like the average and the total revenues checks per person and the self-checkout and the ordering checkout? Because if I have lots of things, doesn't matter if I have Stigma items or not, I'll just go and interact with the person. I don't want to do myself.
Right.
But if I'm just buying a couple of things, I don't like care about the Stigma items. I'll just go and do self-checkout myself.
Right.
Have you tried to look at this, like how many items they were buying and Stigma items were inside or?
Yeah, that's a great point. We looked at it a little bit just for condoms specifically. And yeah, we found that the majority of purchases at both self-checkout and regular were, yeah, very small. So we did find like some larger, like maybe 10 or 20 item purchases, both at self-checkout and regular registers. So I'm not, like right now we just have histograms. I'm not sure how we can like more rigorously think about, yeah, but I think definitely investigating more about the transaction size as a mechanism is a great idea.
Yeah, but it's really.
Or even using transaction size as a dimension of heterogeneity.
Okay.
among small purchases is their effect, among big purchases.
Yeah.
Is their effect.
Yeah, that
Right.
would be a solution for that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh. Okay. I'm not sure.
Okay, I think we still cannot see our. Okay. Hello, everyone, once again, and to those who are joining us online. Unfortunately, our first speaker couldn't join us today, so that's why we have only two speakers, and Rebecca was the first one, and now I will be presenting my slides. Oh, sorry. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name is Nargiza Choriva, and I've just completed my master's thesis, and this is the part of my work, and I was supervised by Brent Swallow and Sandeep Mohapatra, and I came from today from Canada. I am from University of Alberta, and the work that today I want to present to you, it's a very fancy name, the econometrics of hope. So let's start. So let's start with the motivation for this research. So we rarely think of hope as a determinant of economic outcomes, yet it has been shown a great motivator of human behavior in psychology. According to the emergent literature of hope, in individual psychological attributes, including hope and aspirations, create internal constraints that play an important role in welfare and poverty constructs. However, we've seen lots of like standard approaches in economics, which is typically focused on alleviating external constraints, for example, building schools, roads, access to market, hospitals, and etc. So, and recently we see that there is some studies that have incorporated long-standing psychological concept of hope into economics, and this led to the emergence of the new field that blends psychology, like economics, sociology, and other sciences. And we know that economists always emphasize the importance of comparing apples to apples, holding all else constant, and all those increasing use of randomized controlled trials, experiments, and economics brought us closer to make such adequate comparisons. However, as an economist, venture into studying the effects of latent constructs like hope, we may inadvertently compare apples to oranges. So on the surface, the word hope has the same meaning for all, like to different people, but in reality, its understanding varies with culture, upbringing, geography, and other many factors. So that's why in the literature, a surprising omission that of hope in economics, we found that while psychology pays an immense attention to the measurement of hope, economists, the new economics still hasn't. So that's why there are some caveats. So the first one, it's not directly observable, it's latent. It's difficult to measure. There are several hope scales exist, but still there is no consensus which one is the best. The second, even if these existing hope models are good, they were primarily used and tested in developed countries. So, so it can be problematic to apply it to the context of developing countries, which I will be showing today in terms as an example of Tanzania. So third, that most studies of hope were conducted in the educational or health settings. These are very specific samples. And the fourth, that measuring hope can be challenging because of the measurement invariance, that the items, which is survey questions, are interpreted equivalently by all people in our population. So, and understanding those group differences in measuring hope may be critical because it affects our behavior and our like economic behavior and poverty outcomes. So, and currently the issue of measurement invariance is unexplored and requires investigation. So, so that's why the objective of my work is to assess the links between question responses and latent construct of hope using item response theory. In other words, to find if the survey questions measuring hope adequately. And the second objective is to find if hope questions are interpreted equivalently by individuals of different backgrounds. To meet the second goal, I'm going to use the differential item functioning. And I will be looking for the different demographic characteristics and in the population, their access to public services. Okay, so the model that I used is the item response theory, which is the most effective method for examining underlying latent constructs and item properties. It's the probabilistic model of how participant would respond at any given of their latent trait, which is hope, to the questions. So in our case, if the individual is very hopeful, he or she is gonna more likely to agree with the statement that we are asking. So it depends again on the difficulty of the item. So I will be will be using item for question. Okay. So if the question, so it depends on two things: how difficult is the question to agree with, and how hopeful is the person. Okay. So and differential item functioning, which is also like item bias, is an item parameter interaction between groups and items, which is questions. So finding diff is generally undesirable since it might risk the validity of the instrument that we are using in our survey. However, if we find any diff, it may lead to better understand the psychological constraints of the population. So, so about our data. So for that, this study evaluates the baseline data conducted in July-August 2020 from 98 villages of total 2,814 households. And the end-line data right now is getting like scheduled for July-August. So it's right now happening there. So this study is within the larger study of the Empowered Worldview by the World Vision team and its collaborators in Tanzania. So so why I have this end-line data? I will not be talking about any intervention, treatment things that happening right now because I was working only with the baseline data. But in a larger project, we were trying to make treatment as called Empowered Worldview. This is the behavioral change curriculum that is based on the biblical principles. So it is meant to change the mindset and the behavior. So, so on the here you can see that we have intervention and control villages. So here you can see just the list of the hope questions that we have used. So we have 8 positive statements and 4 negative statements, and I coded them like reverse coded to know that if they are getting 4, if they strongly disagree with the negative statements, which means that they are hopeful, and they are getting 4 if they strongly agree with the statement which was the positive item. So they are again more hopeful. So yeah, we can see that respondents answered differently to from the descriptive stats to the positive and negative items. For example, the means for positive questions were higher than for negative questions. It means that it was difficult to disagree with questions, with the negative questions than agreeing with the positive questions. So, okay, so this is the results. So you can see here that 8 of them are positively stated items and 4 of them are negatively stated items. So let's focus on the strong lines, which is strongly agree for positive and strongly disagree with the negative items. So we can see that it measures hope accurately, those questions, because we can see that they are on a different level. So they can separate individuals well. However, we uncover a striking pattern across positive and negative ones. So here's the example. So if we are taking, as an example, I will just tell you that if we're taking a math test, we don't want to use only easy questions because we want to know the knowledge of students who are very have high math ability and who have low math ability. Same with hope. We want to have such survey that can cover from low to medium and high hope levels range. So here we can see that positive item 1, which is I feel loved by someone, sheds little information on people who are very hopeful. So since most just agree with it, even those who have lower levels of hope, while a negative item gets a strongly disagree only from those who are very hopeful. In other words, item 1 requires low levels of hope to elicit strong agreement, and item 11, which is I'm running out of options for improving my life, requires much higher levels to be strongly to disagree with. So if we look for the item information functions, so this is how much information gives every item. So if we look here, positive items, they give lots of information, but at the lower and medium levels of hope, while negative question 10, for example, it covers people with higher levels of hope. So when we look for the diff, I've decided to divide them into 6 categories. First is gender, region, whether the person is adult or adolescent, food insecurity, they have access to food or not, and their access to protected water, and whether it's intervention and control. So again, intervention control, nothing treatment was done there. I just want to see that those survey questions are perceived in the same way in these intervention and control regions. So if you don't see anything here, so it means that it's not statistically significant, so I've just removed them. So here we can see that that females with the same level of hope levels as males are less likely to agree that they are making progress, that they can handle current and future difficulties, and the future will bring opportunities for better life. However, they are more likely to agree that with faith and spiritual belief statements compared to males with the same levels of hope. And people, we had 2 regions, so we can see that 2 regions in our data, they perceive differently those questions, so we cannot compare them fully. And the second, adults and adolescents, for example, we see that adults are more likely to agree that they can handle any current or future difficulties, and that the future that their faith in a higher power gives them more strength to pursue dreams. Those who managed to meet daily food needs for the last year and have access to water are more likely to say that they have purpose in life, even though they have equal hope levels with those who are food insecure and don't have access to protected water, and almost no diff for the treatment and control. And when we come to the negative statements, we see that again, we see no gender differences, which is good probably, and we see some regional differences, and we see that adults are less likely to disagree with that they are running out of options and some way someone may betray them. And those who didn't manage to meet daily food needs for the last year also likely to disagree with the negative worded statements. So to sum up, I just want to say that the survey questions that were used to measure hope indeed can successfully discriminate participants population that we are testing, but there are some improvements that we can do. That positive items are good in measuring latent hope, but only at the lower and average levels of hope. Negative items are less informative, but covers people with a wider range of hope levels, especially those who have higher levels of hope. And there are 4 items that if they will be replaced with questions with higher information value and covering so far uncovered parts, the performance of the scale would improve. And for the next objective, we see that we find differences in how groups of respondents answered the survey. Almost no diff for control and treatment group, but there is an evidence of heterogeneity in other groups. For example, if diff among adults and adolescents is ignored in the future stages of the study, adolescents will be erroneously scored as less hopeful than adults. Thank you. If you have any questions, I will be happy to listen.
So, what is the biggest benefit to thinking about this latent hope measure as opposed to a more specifically measured survival competence or mastery? Like some of those individual questions seem more precise than hope. And so if you can measure them more precise, then what do we gain by looking at sort of the latent measure?
Yeah, so I just did the unidimensional one. So I was trying to make one hope, but we can just do multidimensional analysis and then divide the hope to different sections. But it is again like from the theory, how psychologists were trying to measure hope. So I don't know how we can like improve it by just dividing it, but we can like even with the survey that we have, we can just do multidimensional model and see how it affects.
Really interesting. I was wondering for the regional differences, like because I think the baseline was in July of 2020.
Yeah.
Is there, do you know if there are any differences in like COVID, lockdown?
Yeah, so at that time we were asking the enumerators who were doing the survey. They were telling that there is no COVID here, so everything is good. But there are some differences in the region. For example, Iringa is like, they have higher incomes. They have some like industry, coal mining, if I'm not mistaken. While Kigoma is because it's on the border, they have lots of refugees coming. So that's why it's a bit like rural, agricultural dependent region. So, but in terms of the COVID, yeah, like we've asked this question a lot, but they said there was like nothing happening there. So if you have any other questions in the Zoom online, no questions? Okay. So that means that this is the end of our session. We will continue discussing it here. So thanks for joining. Thanks for joining you. Okay.